My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 36 years old, and until 2 years ago, I believed one thing about my family above everything else, that no matter how complicated things became, we would never betray each other. I was wrong. The lake house my grandfather left me wasn't just a property. It was the one place in the world where everything felt steady, where the air smelled like pine and old wood and summer storms, where memories lived in every floorboard. And one night, standing in my parents' hallway with a plate of leftover pie in my hands, I overheard them planning to take it from me. Not ask, not borrow, take it, sell it, and give the money to my younger brother. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. My family didn't see the lake house as my inheritance. They saw it as their asset, and they were already planning how to spend it. But what they didn't know was that I had already made a decision that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching from right now? And if you've ever had a moment where family crossed a line you never thought they would, hit subscribe, because sometimes the people who raised you are the ones you eventually have to stand up to. The lake house sat about 2 hours outside Minneapolis, tucked along the edge of a quiet lake called Pine Hollow. It wasn't fancy. The place was built in the early 70s by my grandfather, Robert Mitchell, who had worked 35 years as a mechanic before retiring and building it himself. The siding was faded cedar, the porch sagged slightly on one corner, and the screen door made this unmistakable squeak every time you opened it. But to me, it was perfect. When I was little, Grandpa used to say the house had a heartbeat. He said you could hear it late at night when the lake got quiet and the wind rustled through the trees. The house remembers everyone who's loved it, he told me once, while we sat on the dock eating watermelon. I must have been 8 years old. I didn't understand what he meant back then, but years later, I did. When Grandpa passed away, the will shocked everyone. He left the lake house to me, not to my parents, not to be split between the family, just me. At the reading of the will, my mother tried to hide her surprise, but I could see it clearly in her eyes. My father's reaction was quieter, but my younger brother Ethan didn't even try to hide his irritation. "Why, Lauren?" he asked the lawyer bluntly. The attorney adjusted his glasses. "Your grandfather left a letter explaining his decision. Then he handed me an envelope. My hands trembled when I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. Lauren, you're the only one who ever loved that place the way I did. You fixed the dock with me when everyone else wanted to go home. You planted tomatoes with me in the garden when the bugs were terrible. You listened when I told stories nobody else cared about. That house isn't just land and wood, it's peace. And I want you to have a place in this world where no one can take that from you. Take care of it. Love, Grandpa." I cried reading that letter, but looking back now, I should have noticed the looks on my family's faces, because in that moment, something invisible shifted, and I didn't realize it until years later. At first, nothing seemed wrong. My parents congratulated me. Ethan made a few jokes about rich lake house owners. Life moved on. I worked as a marketing manager at a healthcare company in Minneapolis, living in a small downtown apartment. Every Friday evening after work, I drove 2 hours north to Pine Hollow. The lake house became my escape. I fixed things slowly. The roof needed patching. The plumbing was outdated. The deck boards were rotting. Every month, I spent part of my paycheck restoring the place. New windows, fresh paint, updated wiring. By the time 3 years had passed, the old house looked alive again. The garden grew wild with tomatoes and herbs. The porch swing had new chains, and the dock stretched further out into the lake. Some nights, I'd sit out there alone with a glass of wine and listen to the water lap against the wood. It felt like the only place in my life where I could breathe. Meanwhile, my brother's life looked very different. Ethan was 32 and had never held a job longer than a year. He bounced between ideas constantly: a craft brewery startup, a cryptocurrency venture, a food truck business. Each one ended the same way, with him asking our parents for help, and they always gave it. "Your brother just needs support right now," my mom would say. "Entrepreneurship takes time," my dad insisted. But whenever something went wrong for me, the response was different. When I worked 60-hour weeks to earn a promotion, they said, "That's good." When I paid off half my student loans, "That's responsible." It was never celebration, just expectation. I was the reliable one, the stable one, the one who didn't need help. So help flowed in only one direction, toward Ethan. For years, I ignored it. I told myself that was just how families worked. But resentment builds slowly, like rust. You don't notice it until one day something snaps. The first crack appeared during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. We were sitting around my parents' table in their suburban house outside Minneapolis. Ethan had brought his girlfriend Kelsey, a cheerful woman with bright red hair who laughed at everything he said. Halfway through dinner, Ethan cleared his throat dramatically. "I have some news." My mom immediately lit up. What is it? Kelsey squeezed his hand. We're expecting. The table erupted. My mom screamed in excitement. My dad stood up to hug them. Everyone started talking at once, except me. I smiled, of course. I congratulated them. But something about the way my parents' excitement exploded made me uneasy, because suddenly everything revolved around the baby. Within minutes, the conversation shifted to practical concerns. Where would they live? Their apartment was small. Babies needed space. Good schools mattered. Then my mother said something strange. Well, we'll figure something out. She glanced at my dad, and they shared a look I didn't understand at the time, but I would soon. Over the next few weeks, the subject kept coming up. My mom called me more often than usual. At first, the conversation seemed normal. How's work? Have you been to the lake house lately? But slowly the questions became specific. How often do you actually stay there? Isn't it expensive maintaining two places? Do you ever think about selling it? Each time she asked, my stomach tightened. I'm not selling it, I said gently. She'd laugh. Oh, honey, I'm just asking. But something in her voice told me the question wasn't innocent. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. I had driven to my parents' house for dinner like usual. My mom cooked roast chicken. My dad opened a bottle of wine. Ethan and Kelsey arrived late, arguing quietly about something. Dinner passed normally. Too normally. When dessert finished, I took the empty plates to the kitchen. That's when I heard voices from the hallway. My parents were in the living room. They thought I was still in the kitchen, and they were whispering. My father spoke first. We need to do this before the baby comes. My heart skipped. My mother sighed. Lauren won't like it. We're not asking, my dad replied. We'll convince her. A cold feeling crept up my spine. Then my mother said something that made my hands go numb. The lake house should be Ethan's anyway. He has a family now. Silence followed. Then my father said the words that changed everything. If we sell it, the down payment on a house would be covered easily. I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. My mother hesitated, but Lauren inherited it. She doesn't need it, my father said flatly. She only uses it on weekends. My breath caught in my throat. She'll understand, my mother whispered. And if she doesn't, my father paused. We still have the spare key. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too quiet, because in that moment I realized something horrifying. My parents weren't discussing an idea. They were planning to sell my house and give the money to my brother without even asking me. And standing there in the dim hallway, I felt something inside me finally break, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing forever. Because in that moment I understood exactly what they thought of me. Not a daughter, not a person with boundaries, just the responsible one, the one who would sacrifice again, the one who would give up what mattered most to keep everyone else happy. But this time, I wasn't going to. And what I decided to do next was something none of them saw coming. The moment I stepped out of my parents' house that night, the cold Minnesota air hit my face like a slap. But it wasn't the temperature making my hands shake. It was the realization that my family had already decided my future without me. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual. Streetlights blurred past my windshield while my mind replayed the conversation again and again. We're not asking. If we sell it, every word echoed. For years, I had believed that if something truly important came up, my parents would talk to me honestly. They might pressure me, maybe guilt me a little, but they would still respect that the lake house was mine. But what I heard that night wasn't negotiation. It was planning. Planning that didn't include my consent. By the time I reached my apartment parking garage, a knot had formed in my stomach, because suddenly another thought crept in. If they were willing to talk about selling it, how far were they actually willing to go? The next morning I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mom. That wasn't unusual, but the text she sent after them made my chest tighten. Call me when you wake up. We need to talk about something important. Important. The word felt loaded now. I stared at my phone for a long time before calling her back. She answered immediately. Lauren, I was worried you were sleeping in. I just woke up, I said carefully. There was a brief pause. Then she spoke in the same soft tone she used when she was about to ask for something. I've been thinking a lot about Ethan and the baby. Of course she had. Yeah? Well, they're going to need more space soon. I leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping my phone tighter. Mom, I said slowly, they live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Yes, but babies require room and stability. Lots of babies grow up in apartments. Another pause. I could almost hear her adjusting her plan. Well, your father and I were discussing options. My heart pounded. What options? Oh, just possibilities. Then she casually asked the question I'd already heard her whisper about the night before. Have you ever considered selling the lake house? There it was, the same words. Except now she was pretending it was just a random idea. My jaw clenched. No, she laughed lightly. You didn't even think about it. I don't need to? But honey, you barely use it. I use it every weekend. Well, that's exactly my point, she said quickly. It sits empty most of the week. Something inside me snapped. Mom, I said firmly, the lake house is not for sale. Silence filled the line. Then she sighed dramatically. You are being very defensive. I'm being clear. Well, we're just trying to think about the family. Family. That word suddenly felt different. I am the family too, I said quietly. Her voice cooled slightly. Of course you are. But the way she said it made it sound like an afterthought. Over the next few days, the pressure began. Not openly at first, just small comments. My dad texting articles about real estate prices. My mom mentioning how expensive childcare was. Ethan sending me pictures of cribs and baby furniture. At first I tried ignoring it, but then something changed. The messages started assuming the decision had already been made. One evening, Ethan sent a photo of a baby nursery he liked. Underneath it he wrote, "This would look perfect in that lake house spare bedroom." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "That room is not becoming a nursery." He didn't respond, but 20 minutes later my phone rang. Dad? I answered reluctantly. "Hey kiddo." His voice was overly cheerful. "Hi, so your brother said you seemed a little upset earlier." I laughed bitterly. "A little? Well, we're all just trying to figure out the best solution here." "There is no we solution," I said. "It's my property." "Yes, legally it is." The way he said legally made my stomach twist. "But families share things," he continued. "Share," I repeated slowly. "Yes. Support each other." "And by support you mean selling my house?" He exhaled impatiently. "Lauren, don't make this dramatic. You're the ones being dramatic." "No," he said sharply. "You're being selfish." The word hung in the air. Selfish. For not giving away my inheritance. I felt anger rise in my chest. "I'm hanging up now. Think about your nephew or niece," he said quickly before I could. "I am," I replied, "and they deserve parents who can provide for them." Then I ended the call. The next weekend, I drove to the lake house like usual, but something felt different as I pulled into the gravel driveway. For the first time since inheriting the place, I felt uneasy. The house looked peaceful as always. Tall pine trees swayed around the yard. The lake shimmered in the afternoon sun. But instead of comfort, I felt a strange sense of vulnerability. Because suddenly, I remembered what my dad had said. We still have the spare key. I walked slowly up the porch steps. The screen door squeaked open. Inside, everything looked the same. The living room smelled like cedar and old books. The couch blanket I always used was still folded neatly, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. What if they had already been here? What if they were already treating it like theirs? That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. Branches scratching against the roof, wind rattling the windows. For the first time since Grandpa built this place, the lake house didn't feel entirely safe. Sunday morning, I sat on the dock with a cup of coffee. The lake was glassy and still. Normally, this was my favorite moment of the week, but my mind was spinning because something had become painfully clear. My parents weren't going to stop asking. They believed they were entitled to that house. And if they believed that strongly, what would stop them from going further? The thought made my stomach churn. Then my phone buzzed. A new text from my dad. "We scheduled a showing next Saturday. Thought you should know." For a moment, I thought I had read it wrong. Showing? My heart began pounding. I called him immediately. He answered calmly. "What showing?" "The lake house." "You can't schedule a showing for my property. We're just exploring options. You don't have the authority. We have the key." My entire body went cold. "Cancel it. We're doing this for Ethan." I said, "Cancel it, Lauren," he said firmly. "Stop overreacting." That word again. Overreacting. Like my inheritance was a group decision. "Dad," I said slowly, "if anyone shows up at that house, I will call the police." There was a pause. Then he chuckled. "You wouldn't do that to your own parents." My voice hardened. "Try me." Then I hung up. I sat on the dock for a long time after that. The water rippled softly around the wood posts, but my mind felt like a storm. They weren't bluffing. They were actually planning an open house, without my permission. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. They believed they could pressure me into agreeing once buyers showed interest, embarrass me, corner me, force my hand. For years I had always been the reasonable one, the one who avoided conflict, the one who gave in to keep peace. But something about the situation was different. This wasn't about money, it was about control, and my parents had assumed I would eventually fold. I stared at the lake for a long time. Then my grandfather's voice surfaced in my memory. "Take care of it, love it." But there was another part of his letter I hadn't thought about until now. A place in this world where no one can take that from you. The The word take echoed in my mind, because that was exactly what my family was trying to do. And suddenly a strange idea began forming. At first, it felt crazy, too drastic, too permanent. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. If my parents wanted the house sold so badly, fine, it would be sold, just not the way they expected, and not for their benefit. I stood up slowly from the dock. My hands were shaking. But for the first time in days, my thoughts felt clear, because the plan I was about to set in motion would end the situation once and for all. My family thought they could control what happened to my lake house, but they had made one massive mistake. They had assumed I would wait for their decision. They had no idea I was about to make my own. And once I did, there would be no going back. I barely slept Sunday night. The idea that had formed on the dock kept circling in my mind like a storm that refused to settle. At first it felt reckless, but the longer I thought about it, the clearer it became. My parents believed they could pressure me into selling the lake house. They believed they could stage an open house and corner me into agreeing. They believed the house was something they could manipulate. But there was one thing they had forgotten. Legally, the house was mine, which meant one very important thing. If it was going to be sold, only I could decide when, and I could decide to whom. By Monday morning, my decision was made. Instead of going straight to work, I drove to a real estate office downtown. The building sat on a busy corner with tall glass windows displaying glossy property listings. For a moment, I sat in my car staring at the entrance. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Selling the lake house felt like tearing out a piece of myself, but another thought followed quickly. If my parents succeeded in their plan, I might lose it anyway. Only then, I would lose it and be forced to give the money to Ethan. At least this way, the choice would be mine. I grabbed my purse and walked inside. The office smelled faintly of coffee and new carpet. A receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to speak to an agent about listing a property." She nodded and made a quick phone call. A few minutes later, a tall woman in her early 40s approached me. "Hi, I'm Karen Blake." Her handshake was firm. "What kind of property are we talking about?" "A lake house," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Those move quickly in this area. We sat down at a small conference table. Karen pulled out a notebook. Location? Pine Hollow Lake. That got her attention. "That's a very desirable area," I swallowed. "I want to sell it quickly." "How quickly?" "As soon as possible." Karen studied me carefully. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated. Then I decided to be honest. "My family is trying to sell it without my permission." Her eyes widened. "They can't legally do that." "I know," I said, "but they're planning an open house anyway." She leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "That's bold." "Can you list it immediately?" Karen thought for a moment. "Yes," she said finally. "If you're serious." "I am." "Then we'll need photos, paperwork, and a competitive price." I nodded. "I'm ready." 2 days later, Karen drove out to the lake house with a photographer. The moment she stepped inside, she looked impressed. "You've taken incredible care of this place." I forced a small smile. "My grandfather built it." The photographer moved through the house, capturing every angle. Sunlight poured through the big living room windows. The wooden staircase creaked softly under our footsteps. Karen walked slowly around the kitchen. "This will attract buyers immediately." Her voice was calm and professional, but my chest tightened, because every compliment reminded me what I was about to give up. Still, the decision had already been made. Karen finished taking notes. "I recommend pricing it slightly below market value." "How much below?" "Enough to attract immediate offers." I nodded. "Do it." She studied my face carefully. "You're sure?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm certain about one thing." "What's that?" "My parents will never control this property." Karen smiled slightly. "Then let's get it sold." The listing went live Thursday afternoon. I spent the entire day at work pretending everything was normal, but my phone sat on my desk like a ticking bomb. Every buzz made my heart jump. By 5 p.m., Karen called. "You're not going to believe this." "What?" "We already have 5 showing requests." My stomach flipped. "That fast?" "Lake houses are hot right now." I swallowed. "And offers?" "Not yet," she said, "but I expect them soon." The next day, things escalated. Karen called again around noon. "Lauren, are you sitting down?" "Yes. Someone just submitted a full-price offer." My breath caught. That was fast, very fast. "Who is it?" "His name is Daniel Harper, recently widowed, retired architect." The name meant nothing to me. "What did he say about the house?" Karen flipped through her notes. "He said it reminded him of a place his wife used to dream about." Something about that made my chest ache. "He wants a quick closing," she continued. "How quick?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks. My parents' fake open house was scheduled for next Saturday, which meant if everything moved fast enough, the house might already be sold before they even unlocked the door. The thought sent a strange rush through my body. "Accept it," I said. Karen paused. "You don't want to negotiate?" "No." "You could get more money." "I don't care about more money. She seemed surprised, but she didn't question me further. All right, she said. I'll start the paperwork. The next 14 days passed in a blur. Inspections, documents, signatures. Each step made the situation more real and more terrifying because my parents had no idea any of this was happening. They continued acting like the lake house was already theirs to sell. My mom called Wednesday. "We've been thinking about staging the living room," she said cheerfully. My heart pounded. Why? For the open house. I kept my voice steady. "You shouldn't do that." "Oh, relax," she laughed. "Buyers expect staging." Buyers. The irony almost made me laugh. "Mom," I said quietly, "you should cancel it." Nonsense. Then she added something that made my stomach twist. "Your father already told Ethan he could start measuring rooms." Friday afternoon, Karen called with the final update. "Everything's approved." I sat frozen at my desk. What does that mean? It means the closing is Monday morning. Monday, 3 days before my parents' open house. My pulse raced. "After Monday," Karen continued, "the house legally belongs to Mr. Harper." I exhaled slowly. "Okay." "You're very calm," she said. "You'd be surprised how chaotic these situations usually are." I almost laughed. "You have no idea." Monday morning, I sat in a quiet office signing the final paperwork. Stacks of documents covered the table. The lawyer explained each page carefully. My hand trembled as I wrote my name again and again. With every signature, the lake house slipped further away from me. Finally, the lawyer closed the folder. "That's it," he said. "The sale is complete." Just like that. The house my grandfather built, the place that held every childhood memory, the sanctuary that saved me during the hardest years of my life, was no longer mine. A strange emptiness settled in my chest, but underneath it, there was also relief, because the moment my parents tried to force their plan, they had lost control of the situation. They just didn't know it yet. Saturday morning arrived 5 days later, the day of the open house. I was drinking coffee in my apartment when my phone suddenly exploded with calls. Dad, Mom, Ethan, all back to back. I answered my dad's call first. He sounded furious. "Lauren, where are you?" "At home. There's a man in your lake house." My heart skipped. "What?" "We went to start setting up for the open house," he snapped. "And some stranger was inside." I stayed silent. "He said he owns the place," my dad continued angrily. "Can you believe that?" I closed my eyes, because the moment had finally arrived. "Yes," I said quietly. "I can believe it." "What does that mean?" "It means he's telling the truth." There was a long pause. Then my dad's voice turned dangerously low. "What did you do?" I took a deep breath. "I sold the house." Silence filled the phone. Heavy. Explosive. "You? What?" "I sold it 2 weeks ago." The shouting that followed echoed through my apartment. "You had no right." "It was mine," I replied calmly. "You can't do this to your brother." "I didn't," I said. "You did." But the real confrontation hadn't even started yet, because at that exact moment, my family was still standing in the driveway of a house that no longer belonged to any of us, and the police had just arrived. By the time I pulled onto Pine Hollow Road, my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands. The entire drive up from Minneapolis had felt surreal. For 2 weeks, I had known this moment would come, but knowing something is coming and actually driving toward it are two completely different things. My phone had gone silent after my father's shouting. No more calls, no more texts, which somehow felt worse, because silence from my family usually meant one thing. They were furious. The gravel road that led to the lake house curved through tall pine trees, just like it always had. Sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling the ground in shifting patches of gold. Normally this road made me feel calm, but today my stomach twisted tighter with every mile. As I rounded the final bend, the house came into view, and so did the chaos. A sheriff's cruiser sat in the driveway. My parents' SUV was parked beside it. Ethan's small sedan was half blocking the gravel path, and standing near the porch were 3 figures. My father, a uniformed officer, and a tall gray-haired man I immediately recognized from the paperwork. Daniel Harper, the new owner. My heart pounded. The scene looked exactly like the confrontation I had imagined, except now it was real. I parked behind the sheriff's car and stepped out slowly. The moment my father saw me, he threw his hands into the air. "Finally!" His voice echoed across the yard. The officer turned toward me. "Are you Lauren Mitchell?" "Yes, I'm Deputy Collins," he said calmly. "Your parents claim there's been some confusion about ownership of this property." Confusion. That word almost made me laugh. My mother stood near the porch steps, pale and trembling. Ethan paced beside the driveway with his arms crossed. Daniel Harper remained surprisingly calm, hands resting casually in his jacket pockets. He looked more amused than upset. My father marched toward me. "Tell them," he demanded. "Tell them this man has no right to be here." The officer watched quietly. I took a slow breath. Then I spoke. "This house isn't mine anymore." The silence that followed felt heavy and enough to crush the air. My father blinked. What? I sold it, I repeated. To Mr. Harper. The officer glanced toward Daniel, who simply nodded. That's correct, he said calmly. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. You actually did it, she whispered. Ethan stared at me like he had never seen me before. You're joking. No. The officer pulled out a small notebook. Do you have documentation confirming the sale? Daniel Harper reached into a folder he had brought with him. Right here. He handed over copies of the closing paperwork. Deputy Collins studied them carefully. My father paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You can't just sell family property without discussing it. I looked at him steadily. It wasn't family property. It was your grandfather's house, and he left it to me. My voice didn't shake for once. Deputy Collins finished reading the documents and nodded. Well, the paperwork checks out. He turned to my parents. Sir, ma'am, this property belongs to Mr. Harper now. My father's face turned bright red. That's impossible. It's legal, the officer replied calmly. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. Lauren, how could you do this? I almost laughed because that question felt so backwards. How could I? Yes, she cried. Your brother has a baby coming. I glanced toward Ethan. He avoided my eyes. You never asked me, I said quietly. We didn't need to ask, my father snapped. Families help each other. I shook my head slowly. No, they respect each other. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was wind rustling through the pine trees. Then Ethan finally exploded. You ruined everything. His voice cracked with anger. You had one thing that could help this family, and you just threw it away. I stared at him. You mean the thing Grandpa left to me? You barely used it. I used it every weekend. That's not the point, he shouted. It's just a house. My chest tightened. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. Daniel Harper cleared his throat politely. I hate to interrupt, he said gently, but I would appreciate it if everyone could leave the property now. My father turned on him immediately. You stay out of this. Daniel didn't even flinch. I'm afraid I can't, he said calmly. I live here. The officer stepped forward. Sir, I need you to calm down. For a moment, I thought my father might actually lose control, but eventually he exhaled sharply and stepped back. Deputy Collins looked at Daniel. Do you want to press trespassing charges? Daniel glanced around the yard. Then he shook his head. No. My parents visibly relaxed. But, he added calmly, I would like them to leave. The officer nodded. All right. He turned toward my family. You heard him. My mother started crying quietly. Ethan muttered something under his breath and kicked a rock across the driveway. My father walked toward the car without another word. Before getting in, he turned toward me. You destroyed this family today. His voice was cold. Remember that. Then he slammed the car door. The engine roared to life. One by one, the vehicles disappeared down the gravel road. And just like that, the chaos was over. The yard suddenly felt eerily quiet. Only the breeze and the distant sound of water against the dock remained. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. Then Daniel Harper walked over to me. You handled that well, he said. I let out a shaky laugh. I'm not sure I'd call it well. He studied me for a moment. You love this place. It wasn't a question. I nodded. My grandfather built it. Daniel looked toward the lake. My wife always wanted a house near water, he said softly. His voice carried a quiet sadness. We talked about it for years. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded again. After a moment, he smiled gently. You're welcome to visit the dock anytime, he said. The offer caught me off guard. That's very kind. I mean it, he continued. This place should still feel like part of your life. I swallowed hard. Thank you. But as I walked back to my car, a strange mix of emotions filled my chest. Relief, grief, and something else. Because even though the confrontation was over, the fallout with my family had only just begun. And the next few weeks would reveal something I never expected. Something that would make their betrayal even worse. Because the truth was, they had never actually needed the money from the lake house. Not even close. And once I discovered what they had been hiding, I realized the entire situation had been built on a lie. The week after the confrontation felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. For years, my phone had buzzed constantly with family messages, group chats, random updates, my mom asking if I was coming to Sunday dinner. But now, nothing. No calls. No texts. No invitations. It was like someone had flipped a switch and erased me from their lives. At first, I told myself I didn't care. I focused on work. I stayed late at the office. I went to the gym more often. Anything to keep my mind from drifting back to Pine Hollow. But silence has a way of making your thoughts louder. And late at night, lying in my apartment staring at the ceiling, I kept hearing my father's voice echoing in my head. You destroyed this family today. The words dug deeper than I wanted to admit, because part of me still wondered if I had. 3 weeks passed before I heard from anyone again, and the person who contacted me wasn't who I expected. expected. It was Ethan. The message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting at my desk finishing a report. His name popped up on my phone screen. For a moment, I just stared at it. We hadn't spoken since the confrontation. Finally, I opened the message. Can we meet? Just us. No accusation. No anger. Just a simple request. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. Where? I typed back. He replied almost immediately. A coffee shop in Maple Grove. Tomorrow evening. I hesitated. Then I agreed. The next night, the sky was dark and cloudy as I drove to the cafe. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window. My stomach churned with nervous energy. I didn't know which version of Ethan would show up. The angry brother who yelled at me in the driveway, or the one who used to build forts with me in the backyard when we were kids. At exactly 6 o'clock, the door opened. Ethan stepped inside. For a moment, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted. Dark circles hung under his eyes. His usually messy hair was actually combed, and the anger I expected to see on his face wasn't there. Instead, he looked defeated. He spotted me and walked over slowly. Hey, hi. He sat down across from me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he rubbed his hands together and sighed. This whole thing got out of control. I raised an eyebrow. That's one way to describe it. He gave a weak laugh. Yeah. The waitress came over and took our orders. Once she left, Ethan leaned back in his chair. I need to tell you something, he said. Something you should have known earlier. My stomach tightened. What is it? He hesitated. Then he said something I never expected. We didn't actually need the lake house money. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. What? Our apartment is small, yeah, he continued. But it's not a disaster. Then why? He held up a hand. Let me finish. I leaned back slowly. Ethan looked out the window for a moment before continuing. I've been working in IT support for almost 2 years now. That surprised me. 2 years? He nodded. Remote job. Good pay. Good benefits. That's stable. Yeah, he said quietly. And Kelsey works full-time too. I stared at him. Then why did Mom and Dad act like you were desperate? He sighed heavily. Because they wanted to look like heroes. My confusion deepened. What do you mean? Ethan leaned forward. They told everyone in the family they were going to help us buy a house for the baby. But they didn't have the money, he continued. So they came up with another idea. My chest tightened. They decided your lake house could solve the problem. I felt a wave of anger rise inside me. They never even asked. They didn't plan to, Ethan admitted. They thought if they pushed hard enough you'd give in. I stared at him, stunned. So this entire mess was about their pride, he finished quietly. Not necessity, not survival. Pride. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question, burning in my mind. You knew about this? Ethan nodded slowly. At first, yeah. And you were okay with it? He winced. I thought you might actually agree. Why? Because you always have before. That hurt more than I expected. Because he wasn't wrong. For years I had been the one who gave, the one who sacrificed, the one who kept peace. But this time, I didn't. A few days after that conversation, I decided to dig deeper. Something about Ethan's explanation bothered me. If my parents were so desperate to help him buy a house, why didn't they use their own money? They had owned their suburban home for over 25 years. The mortgage had to be nearly paid off, so I contacted a friend who worked in real estate records. Her name was Melissa, and she owed me a favor from a marketing project I had helped her with. Can you look up something for me? I asked. Sure. My parents' house. There was a pause. That sounds ominous. Just trust me. Melissa called back 2 days later. Her voice sounded confused. Lauren, are you sitting down? Yes. Well, 6 months ago your parents refinanced their house. My chest tightened. Refinanced? They pulled out about $200,000 in equity. The words hit me like a punch. $200,000. Enough for a massive down payment on almost any house. My heart began pounding. So they already had the money. Yeah, Melissa said slowly. Looks like it. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, because suddenly everything made sense. They never needed my inheritance, not even close. They simply didn't want to spend their own money. Instead, they tried to take mine. The realization changed something inside me. For weeks, I had quietly accepted the role of family villain, the selfish daughter, the sister who ruined everything. But now, I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. That Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't been there since the confrontation. The familiar suburban street looked the same as always. Children rode bikes down the sidewalks. Neighbors walked their dogs. Normal life. But inside the Mitchell house, nothing was normal anymore. I walked up to the front door and knocked. My mother answered. Her eyes widened in shock. Lauren. Hi, Mom. For a moment she didn't move. Then she stepped aside slowly. Come in. My father sat at the dining table reading the newspaper. When he saw me, his expression hardened immediately. What are you doing here? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed a thick folder on the table. The papers inside made a heavy thud. My father frowned. What's this? Proof, I said calmly. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of the refinance documents Melissa had sent me. The amount circled in red ink, $200,000. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. You refinanced the house, I said quietly, 6 months ago. Neither of them spoke. You already had enough money to help Ethan. Still silence. So the lake house was never about helping him, I continued. It was about saving your own money. My father finally slammed the folder shut. That's none of your business. I laughed bitterly. It became my business when you tried to steal my inheritance. My mother looked down at the table. Ethan, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, shifted uncomfortably. The truth hung in the air between us, heavy, unavoidable. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, my family had nothing left to say, because their secret was finally exposed, and they knew it. For a long moment, no one in the room said anything. The silence felt thick, like the air had suddenly turned heavy. My father stared down at the refinance documents spread across the dining table. His jaw tightened the way it always did when he realized he had lost control of a situation. My mother looked smaller than I had ever seen her, and Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the floor. I folded my arms. You already had $200,000, I said again quietly. My father exhaled sharply. That money was for our retirement, so my inheritance was easier to spend? I asked. He didn't answer. My mother finally spoke, her voice thin and shaky. We were trying to help your brother. No, I replied calmly. You were trying to look generous without actually sacrificing anything. My father slammed his palm on the table. That's enough. The sudden noise echoed through the kitchen. You think you know everything now? He snapped. I know enough. You don't understand what it's like raising a family. I laughed softly. You raised me. That stopped him for a moment. You taught me about responsibility, I continued. About earning what you have. About not taking advantage of people. My voice hardened. So explain to me why those rules didn't apply to you. My mother wiped her eyes. We thought you'd understand? Understand what? That Ethan needed help. I looked over at my brother. Did you ask them to do this? He shook his head slowly. No, the admission hung in the air. They just decided. My father shot him an irritated glance. But Ethan continued. They told me you'd probably agree. And if I didn't, he hesitated. They thought they could convince you. Convince. That word felt almost insulting now. Because we all knew what they really meant. Pressure. Manipulation. Guilt. The same tactics that had worked on me for years. But not this time. Eventually, I gathered the documents and placed them back into the folder. I didn't come here to fight, I said. My father scoffed. Then why are you here? To make something clear. I looked directly at both of them. I'm done being the family safety net. My mother looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means no more loans, no more emergency bailouts, no more sacrifices just to keep everyone else comfortable. My voice stayed steady. For years I helped, because I thought that's what families do. And it is, my father muttered. No, I corrected gently. Families support each other. My eyes moved between them. But support goes both ways. They had no response, because deep down, they knew it was true. The weeks that followed were strangely peaceful. My phone stopped buzzing with requests for money. No one asked about the lake house. No one mentioned the confrontation again. In many ways, it felt like a strange reset button had been pressed. I focused on my life. Work became easier without the constant emotional weight hanging over me. I started saving more aggressively. Within a few months, I had paid off the rest of my student loans, something I had been working toward for nearly a decade. Each payment felt like reclaiming a small piece of independence. For the first time in years, my finances actually belonged to me. Then, 3 months later, Ethan sent me another message. This one included a photo. A tiny baby wrapped in a pale pink blanket. Underneath it, he wrote, "Her name is Emma." My chest tightened as I looked at the picture. She had a tiny nose and thick dark hair. She looked peaceful, completely unaware of the storm that had surrounded her arrival. "She's beautiful," I replied. Ethan responded almost immediately. "Do you want to meet her sometime?" I hesitated for only a moment. Yes. 2 days later, I drove to Ethan and Kelsey's apartment. It was smaller than I remembered, but warm and clean. The moment I stepped inside, Kelsey handed me the baby. "Careful," she laughed softly. "She's still figuring out the world." Emma's tiny hand wrapped around my finger. The sensation sent a strange warmth through my chest. For a moment, the tension of the past few months melted away, because babies don't understand family drama. They only understand warmth, safety, love. Ethan watched quietly from across the room. She's lucky, I said softly. Why? Because she'll grow up knowing exactly who she can rely on. He nodded slowly. I hope so. That night, after I returned home, I made a decision, something my grandfather would have approved of. The next morning, I visited my bank. I opened a new account. Then I set up a college trust fund. The beneficiary was Emma. The account would be locked until she turned 18. No one could withdraw from it. Not Ethan, not my parents, only Emma. Every month I set up an automatic transfer. Not a huge amount, but enough that by the time she graduated high school, she would have options. When Ethan found out, he called me immediately. You didn't have to do that. I know. Then why did you? I smiled softly. Because helping someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. I think Grandpa would have liked that. So do I. A few weeks later, my mother called. It was the first time we'd spoken since the night I confronted them with the refinance documents. Her voice sounded older somehow, softer. Ethan told us what you did for Emma. I waited. That was thoughtful. The word felt careful, like she was testing it. I didn't respond right away. After a moment, she sighed. We should have asked you about the lake house. The admission was small. Not quite an apology, but closer than I expected. Yes, I said simply. We should have. Another pause followed. Then she said something quiet. Maybe we can start over. I thought about that for a long moment. Family relationships don't heal overnight. Trust doesn't magically rebuild itself. But sometimes you can begin again with new boundaries. We'll see, I said gently. A month later, I returned to Pine Hollow for the first time since the sale. I had texted Daniel Harper beforehand to make sure it was okay. He welcomed me warmly. The lake looked exactly the same. Calm water stretching into the distance, pine trees swaying in the breeze. The dock creaked softly under my feet as I stepped out onto it. For a moment, I just stood there, listening, remembering. Daniel joined me after a while. You're always welcome here, he said. Thank you. We watched the sun begin to set over the lake. Orange light reflected across the water like liquid gold. I used to think losing the house meant losing the memories, I said quietly. And now, I smiled softly. Now I realize memories don't live in walls. They live in people. Daniel nodded. That's a good way to look at it. I glanced out across the lake one last time. My grandfather's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Take care of it. Love it. I had done both. And even though the house belonged to someone else now, the lesson he left me with remained. Family should never demand your self-respect as payment for love. Real support isn't one-sided. And sometimes, the strongest thing you could do for yourself is finally choose yourself.